Seichan had ridden all the way from his university hostel to his home on a bicycle. He was known for being an excellent rider, someone who had a natural command over his bike, navigating even the trickiest of roads with confident ease. The journey had been long, but it gave him a sense of peace. Upon arrival, his uncle Daniel, whom he affectionately referred to as Daddy, was the first to welcome him. With a friendly grin and his usual warmth, Daniel remarked that Seichan had arrived earlier than expected. Seichan, visibly delighted to see him, announced that he was finally home. But Daniel, with a mischievous smile and a teasing tone, placed a reassuring hand on Seichan's shoulder and told him that unfortunately, he wouldn't be playing the role of Daddy today. His voice held a light-hearted edge, but the underlying affection between them was clear. Daniel led Seichan inside, telling him that everything had already been arranged, and asked him about the trip. As they entered the living room, Seichan responded that the trip had been good calming, even. Daniel chuckled in response and suggested that perhaps it was time for Seichan to finally make the switch to a car. Seichan, however, shook his head with a grin and admitted that he still preferred motorcycle. Daniel, wearing a look of fatherly concern, mentioned that he had been thinking about selling the motorcycle. He then invited him over to the dining table, calling him warmly to join. The table had been thoughtfully arranged, filled with a variety of home-cooked dishes. A framed photograph of Seichan's parents sat at the head of the table, surrounded by flowers and small traditional offerings. Seichan's eyes widened as he took in the sight. He couldn't help but express his amazement, commenting that Daniel had really gone all out. Daniel replied that the setup resembled a Korean memorial service. He admitted that while it might not follow every formal tradition to the letter, what mattered most was the sincerity of honoring the day Seichan's parents had passed. Touched, Seichan stepped forward, bowed deeply before his parents' photo, and softly addressed them, Mom and Dad. He told them that on this day, he was greeting them as Sechantha Korean. His voice held a mix of pride and longing, as if speaking to their memory could bridge the distance between past and present. Daniel stood beside him, gazing at the photograph with emotion in his eyes. He gently spoke to the image of his brother, telling him not to worry about his son. He assured him that Seichan had grown into a fine young man. Then, looking at Seichan with pride in his eyes, Daniel commented that the two of them, him and Seichan's father, had done a spectacular job raising such a boy. Seichan's thoughts drifted back in time. A decade ago, when he was just 10 years old, tragedy had struck. His parents had died in a sudden accident, leaving him orphaned. With no immediate relatives to turn to, Seichan had been introduced to Daniel. Back then, he was just a frightened, grieving boy, lost in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar and cold. Daniel had been a friend of Seichan's father. They had met when his father had traveled abroad to study. According to what Seichan had heard, the two had bonded instantly, brought together by a business idea Seichan's father had proposed. That very idea had helped Daniel's business soar, and their friendship had grown deeper and more meaningful over the years. Perhaps it was that strong bond, or simply Daniel's noble heart, that led him to adopt Seichan as his own. It had seemed to him like the only right thing to do, a natural step for someone like Daniela, man who lived by his sense of duty and honor. Now, years later, Seichan was doing his best to live up to that kindness. He was studying hard, determined to make Daniel proud, to someday repay him not just through words, but by becoming someone who could stand tall in the world. As these thoughts passed, a cheerful voice brought Seichan back to the present. A girl had entered the room with lively energy, and upon seeing him, she called out his name. Without hesitation, she rushed over and gave him a warm hug, asking when he had arrived. Seichan laughed and told her it had only been moments ago. With genuine delight, he greeted her by name Monica and said that it had truly been a long time. Monica agreed wholeheartedly, exclaiming that it had been far too long and that it was so good to see him again. She then asked how he had been and whether he had missed her. Seichan grinned and told her, without hesitation, that of course he had missed her. The two shared a comfortable laugh. Monica was Daniel's girlfriend, 17 years younger than him, yet full of confidence and charm. Daniel proudly mentioned that it had been Monica who had arranged the memorial service this year all on her own. Seichan looked at her with admiration and thanked her sincerely. Monica replied that she had prepared it with the kind of care a mother might give. Seichan playfully teased her, saying she couldn't possibly be like a mother to him after all. She was only 12 years older. They all laughed together, the air light with affection and familiarity. Daniel, clearly enjoying the moment, suggested they have a pool party that evening, just the three of them, and maybe even a barbecue. Monica agreed with enthusiasm, clapping her hands in excitement. Later that evening, they prepared for the party. As they gathered near the pool, Monica recounted the story of how she and Daniel had met. She told them that initially she had thought she had been rejected and assumed that was the end of it. But then, unexpectedly, Daniel had approached her again and asked for her number. Seichan listened with amusement, remarking that it was a sweet story. Monica, laughing brightly, said that if she had known Daniel was such a smooth talker, she might not have given him her number at all. Daniel shrugged with a smirk and joked that his charm was irresistible. As the evening wore on, Seichan observed how close the two had become. Though happy for them, he found himself growing tired and excused himself, saying that he hadn't been able to sleep during finals and needed to catch up on rest. Daniel gave a small pout and said he had been hoping to have a fun night now that Seichan was a grown man, but he nodded in understanding and told him to sleep well, saying they'd catch up more in the morning. After Seichan had gone to his room, Monica leaned toward Daniel and whispered that he had no idea how much Seichan had matured. Daniel agreed, noting that the boy had grown up fast. Monica joked that just like your protein bar. She then coyly asked what she should do next. Daniel raised an eyebrow and teased her back, saying that she probably had more ideas than he did and that she was definitely getting more mischievous. He reminded her to lower her voice in case Seichan heard them, but Monica waved the concern away, saying that Seichan was a grown-up now and he definitely knew all about love and relationships. She added that Daniel himself had mentioned that Seichan had a girlfriend in college. Monica chuckled, saying the two must have had their share of fun already. Daniel clarified that Seichan had told him the relationship had ended within a month, and he was single again. Monica frowned in mock sympathy and said it was a shame that he was wasting his youth. Then, glancing at Daniel flirtatiously, she added that he was still more energetic and attractive than most younger men. Meanwhile, Seichan had been quietly peeking out from his room window, observing the two of them. He found Monica's balloons overwhelming, even a bit shocking. He thought to himself that he had never seen someone with that kind of stamina before. He shrugged off his guilt, reasoning that Monica wasn't even officially his stepmother, and besides, Daniel had a tendency to move on to new girlfriends anyway. As he peeked, Monica suddenly looked up and caught him watching. To his surprise, she winked at him playfully. Seichan's eyes widened in disbelief, and he quickly pulled away from the window, retreating into his room. His heart pounded as he wondered if he had imagined it, but he was certain Monica had definitely winked at him. That summer marked a turning point in Seichan's life. He had just turned 20 years old. The weather was hot, the days long, and everything had seemed relatively peaceful until one afternoon when an unexpected ring echoed from Daniel's doorbell. Standing on the doorstep were two unfamiliar girls, both appearing nervous yet determined. Without waiting for permission, they stepped inside the house and directly confronted Daniel. One of them looked at him intently and asked a question that immediately filled the air with tension. Was he their father? An unfamiliar energy swept through the house, unsettling Seichan, who had been used to a calm and quiet home environment. The blonde girl among them stepped further inside, and Seichan, slightly annoyed, pointed out that she should remove her shoes. She looked confused, asking why, but Seichan didn't respond. Instead, he thought to himself that his peaceful domain, which had been his sanctuary, had now officially been invaded. The two girls followed Daniel into the study room, where they began explaining everything. Seichan and Monica, curious and anxious, peered in from just outside. Seichan whispered that the situation seemed serious and told Monica to hang on, while Monica burst out in disbelief. She exclaimed loudly that none of this made any sense, asking how something so bizarre could happen so suddenly. Her voice rose in pitch as she continued to question Daniel's claim. Were these girls truly his biological daughters? One had blonde hair and a distinctly different appearance, while the other bore a faint resemblance to him. Seichan tried to calm Monica down, telling her to be quiet as he couldn't hear anything with her shouting. His curiosity got the better of him again, and he leaned in to listen. After a while, Daniel and the girls emerged from the study, and Daniel, now calmer, asked what all the fuss outside had been about. He noted that the earlier chaos had passed and that it was time for proper introductions. Gesturing toward the girls, he introduced the blonde one as Rebecca and the other as Michelle. He added, with a gentle smile, that they were both the same age as Seichan 20 years old. Seichan was visibly puzzled. He tilted his head and asked how they could be the same age. That would mean Daniel had fathered them both within the same year. The implication stunned him, and he voiced it aloud. Embarrassed, Daniel quickly reached out and placed his hand over Seichan's mouth, signaling him to stop talking. Realizing an explanation was necessary, Daniel began recounting what had happened 2 decades earlier. He had traveled alone to Vietnam and stayed in a modest guest house. During his time there, he met 2 women, one was European, the other Asian. Being Latin himself, the 3 of them had come from vastly different cultures and backgrounds, but youth and adventure had drawn them close. They quickly became friends and, as Daniel put it with a sheepish smile, ended up spending several passionate days together. He admitted that he had been called a playboy back then, and the consequences of those short-lived romances were the 2 young women now standing before them. He explained that Rebecca's mother had recently passed away due to a chronic illness, leaving her with no one to rely on. Rebecca, tall and elegant, had found herself alone. Michelle's situation was different. Their mother was about to marry a man who did not approve of women with children, forcing Michelle to become independent and find her own way in life. At that point, Monica interrupted again. She wasn't satisfied with the story and asked Daniel how he could be so sure that these girls were truly his daughters. She wanted to know if he had verified it properly. Daniel responded calmly, saying he had checked their mother's documents, conducted genetic and blood tests, and even confirmed their birth dates. He had spoken to Michelle's mother directly, ensuring there were no uncertainties. Still skeptical, Monica insisted she wanted to see the evidence herself. But before Daniel could respond, Rebecca spoke up. She said that it wasn't Monica's decision to make and added, somewhat coldly, that from what she had heard, Monica wasn't even family. That statement infuriated Monica, who demanded to know what Rebecca had just said. Tensions rose quickly between them, and it looked like an argument was about to break out. Sensing the escalation, Daniel stepped in firmly. He told them both to stop. He made it clear that he had already made his decision. They would all live together from that day forward. He admitted that he hadn't raised Rebecca or Michelle, but he considered them his daughters all the same and intended to take full responsibility for them. He urged everyone to be kind and respectful toward one another, emphasizing that they were now a family, and family deserved love and courtesy. Rebecca, trying to de-escalate the situation, apologized and said she'd take the blame for the earlier tension, offering a polite, "she is sorry." Daniel, preparing to leave for work, turned to Seichan and gave him a new responsibility. He was to be their guide. He told Seichan to teach them everything he had been taught and to help them adjust to their new life. Seichan hesitated but eventually agreed. He took their luggage and led the girls down the hallway toward their rooms. As they walked, Rebecca noticed Seichan's confused expression. She asked what was on his mind, but he shrugged it off, saying it was nothing. Internally, however, he couldn't shake a heavy feeling in his heart. Being adopted himself, he had grown up with love and care, lacking nothing. But now he realized that these 2 girls had spent their childhoods without a father figure. The thought unsettled him. When they reached the bedroom, he informed them that this would be their shared space. Rebecca looked around, impressed. She remarked that the room was bigger than hers had ever been. She seemed genuinely excited. Seichan clarified that the rooms were actually the same size. It was just the arrangement of the furniture that gave the illusion of space. In fact, he noted, their bed was smaller than his. Michelle pointed toward a door near the corner of the room and asked what lay beyond it. Seichan replied that it was a connecting door to his own room. Rebecca, still curious, asked him why his name was Kang Seichan and whether he had an English name. Seichan explained that Daniel had once asked if he wanted to change it, but since he had been called Seichan for as long as he could remember, it felt most familiar to him. Rebecca then asked if he truly considered Daniel his family. She pointed out that he had grown up in a large house and attended colleges. Surely life had been comfortable for him. Seichan wasn't sure how to interpret her tone. Was she being sincere or condescending? The uncertainty made him uncomfortable. Before the conversation could continue, Michelle asked them to leave so she could change. Seichan nodded and told her to rest, acknowledging that she had traveled a long way. Elsewhere, Daniel and Monica were driving together. During the ride, Monica asked if they were seriously going to live together from now on, just like that after suddenly discovering he had two grown daughters. Daniel laughed softly and asked why she was so anxious. He said it was a good thing that their family had grown unexpectedly. Monica raised an eyebrow and teased him, wondering aloud when exactly he had become such a dedicated family man, considering his notorious playboy past. Daniel smiled and replied that he was 50 years old now. He admitted that he had started to feel the desire to build something stable, a solid company, a loving family, and a future with reliable children. He added that having a woman to settle down with made the idea of growing older feel more meaningful. Monica looked at him incredulously and asked if he was joking. Was he really planning to settle down with just one woman? Daniel looked at her with sincerity and said that meeting a beautiful woman like her had changed his perspective. To him, settling down meant waking up beside her every morning. Monica, still processing his words, told him to stop the car. Then they start wrestling. Back at home, Seichan lay on his bed, restless. His thoughts kept drifting back to Rebecca. He couldn't deny that she seemed to have a complicated personality, yet she was undeniably beautiful. Stunning, even. And her figure only made it harder for him to keep his mind clear. But the shame of his thoughts quickly set in. What was he thinking? This girl was going to be part of his family now. He told himself he was out of his mind and needed some air. He stepped outside and walked into the lawn, hoping the fresh air would help. There, to his surprise, he found Rebecca practicing yoga. From the shadows, he observed her movements. She was graceful, focused, and clearly well practiced in her morning routine. Suddenly, she noticed him. Seichan froze, unsure of what to do now that she had caught him staring. Embarrassed, he decided to play it cool, walked over to greet her casually. He smiled awkwardly and asked what she was up to. Rebecca paused her pose, looked at him curiously, and asked, "So you came here?" Seichan approached Rebecca in the garden, surprised to see her there, and asked softly what she was doing outside so early. Rebecca called him over casually and invited him to join her in a few rehab stretches. Without hesitation, she began instructing him on the poses, demonstrating how to hold his stance. As he clumsily tried to follow, she laughed and guided him further, gesturing for him to press her legs gently to assist with the stretch. Uncertain but obedient, Seichan complied, placing his hands along her legs and pressing with caution. She nodded approvingly and told him to keep going just like that. Meanwhile, inside the house, Michelle wandered into Daniel's study. Alone in the room, she moved slowly, taking in her surroundings and silently observing the details of her father's personal space. Back in the garden, Seichan continued helping Rebecca with her rehabilitation. She directed him again on how to stretch her legs properly. He followed along, all the while thinking that the view from his position was quite something. Rebecca teasingly told him he was pathetically weak and just pretending to be okay. Her blunt comment made him pause and wonder whether he really appeared that feeble to her. He murmured that no one had ever called him weak before. Just then, Michelle appeared, walking into the garden and interrupting them. She asked how much longer they were going to take. Seichan jumped back in surprise and asked her what she needed. Michelle replied calmly that she wanted to find some kitchen utensils, but didn't know where they were. Grateful for the distraction, Seichan offered to help and quickly accompanied her to the kitchen. Once there, he pointed out the cabinets and drawers, showing her where the pots and other tools were kept. Michelle began preparing ingredients, and Seichan asked whether she was hungry and if he should go out and buy something for her. She replied that she wasn't cooking out of hunger, she simply wanted to try making a few dishes before the others arrived. His curiosity piqued. Seichan asked if she was referring to Daniel and commented that she looked tired and could simply rest instead. After all, Daniel had mentioned they might go out for dinner. Michelle shook her head and explained that she preferred to practice cooking, regardless. Seichan, trying to make conversation, asked if she was studying for a culinary certificate or specializing in European or Asian cuisine. Michelle grew visibly irritated his questions. She asked him bluntly to stop talking, saying she needed silence to concentrate on the cooking. Seichan quickly apologized, told her to call him if she needed anything, and left her in peace. That evening, the family gathered around the dining table. Michelle had prepared several dishes for everyone. As they began to eat, Daniel took a bite and looked astonished. He turned to Michelle and asked with disbelief whether she had really made all the food. Seichan chimed in, smiling and nodding proudly, saying that he had tried a bit earlier and found it amazing. Monica, who had been silently tasting the food, was also surprised by how delicious it was. Daniel looked fondly at Michelle and remarked that it was no wonder her mother had been an excellent cook as well. He added that it was admirable to see Michelle putting in such effort, even in a place that was still unfamiliar to her. He said he was proud that she was working so hard to support the family. Hearing this, Michelle stood up from her chair. Daniel looked at her, puzzled, and asked if she had something to say. Without responding at first, Michelle stepped forward and suddenly embraced him. Her voice trembled as she told him that she was deeply happy he had liked the meal. She admitted that since childhood she had always wanted to hear praise from her father, even just a little. Daniel smiled warmly and reassured her that there would be plenty more praise to come. The others at the table were stunned by the sudden emotional exchange. Seichan, observing Michelle, reflected on how curt and distant she had seemed earlier. The atmosphere now felt completely different. He wondered how someone who had appeared so cold was now radiating warmth. As the meal continued, Rebecca leaned over from her chair to reach for a side dish. In doing so, she brushed her arm against Seichan's, and to his surprise, she didn't move it away. She commented softly that the food was delicious as she reached for more. Seichan, distracted, couldn't help but notice her closeness and physical contact. Monica, seated across the table, took note of their behavior. Her gaze shifted from the two of them to Daniel, as if silently pondering what exactly was unfolding in their new, complicated family dynamic. After dinner, all the family members retreated to their respective rooms to rest. Seichan lay on his bed, lost in thought, replaying the events that had occurred between him and Rebecca. He kept wondering if what she had done was truly accidental. In his mind, it felt unmistakably intentional, and he couldn't make sense of the whole situation. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in his room, snacking and drinking alcohol to unwind. Monica joined him shortly after, asking how long he had been awake and whether he had been unable to sleep. Noticing his distant demeanor, she inquired further about what had him so deep in thought that he found himself drinking alone. Daniel admitted that he felt a strange restlessness and, for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, sleep had eluded him. When Monica pressed gently, asking what was bothering him, Daniel responded that it was difficult to put into words, but the experience of seeing his children grow up so well had left him with a peculiar feeling. He explained that lately, his life seemed to have gained richness and depth, and that he was beginning to feel the need for a stable family life before growing any older. Monica quietly reflected that perhaps his earlier comments hadn't been as casual as they seemed. She then hesitantly brought up Rebecca, asking what he truly thought about her. When Daniel asked her what she meant, Monica elaborated, saying that Rebecca's way of dressing seemed a bit excessive. Though Rebecca was an adult now, Monica admitted she didn't feel entirely comfortable with the way she carried herself. Daniel asked what point she was trying to make, and Monica cautiously suggested that since Seichan and Rebecca weren't biologically related and were both adults, didn't he think that could become a complicated situation? After all, one day a beautiful blonde had suddenly appeared in his daughter's life, and it wasn't entirely far-fetched to consider the implications.